Okay, in this video we're going to talk about solving for missing angles in right triangles. Okay, so let's remember our SOHCAHTOA. All right, so the SO in SOHCAHTOA stands for sine of A is opposite over hypotenuse. The CA in SOHCAHTOA stands for cosine of an angle is adjacent over hypotenuse. And then tangent, or TOA, stands for tangent of the angle is opposite over adjacent. Okay? And then all of these are going from angle A, so we circle angle A. And how we label our triangle is we always go with the hypotenuse first. That's the side that's across from the right angle. The other side that's touching the angle is the adjacent side. And the side that's not touching the angle is the opposite side. Okay, again, if you need a review of this, you're going to go back to the trig ratio video. Okay, now in order to find an angle, we're going to use the inverse trig ratios. Okay, so remember, inverse means opposite. So we usually use our sine, cosine, and tangent button in the calculator. But now we're going to use the inverse function, which is the sine, cosine, tangent, and they all have that -1 up there in that exponent position. Okay, so everything is the same as how we would find our trig ratios. Okay, so you're going to circle your angle. Again, I'm going from this angle because that's the angle that we're trying to find. We're going to label our triangles. That's 24 is my hypotenuse. Okay, this other side touching, that would be my adjacent. And 15 is the opposite. So again, I don't have any information for the adjacent. So if I write my SOHCAHTOA, the adjacent can't be used because I don't have any information there. So that means that I'm going to cross out CA because it has the adjacent. I'm going to cross out TOA because it has the adjacent. So it leaves me with sine. So we set it up as follows. It's going to be sine of x, because that's what we're trying to find, degrees. So sine of x is equal to opposite 15 over 24. Okay, now this is a little bit different because we're not actually going to cross multiply in this situation, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to solve for that x. So in essence, we're trying to get rid of that sine function. Well, how do you get rid of a sine function? We're going to do the inverse sine function. And this is kind of the long way to do it. But remember, whatever you do to one side of the equation is you're going to do to the other. Okay, so what ends up happening is this sign and this sign end up canceling. So it just leaves me with x is equal to. And then this I'm going to input into my calculator. And again, it does say up here round to the nearest tenth, which is 1 decimal place. So we want to keep that in mind. Okay, so I'll do this one in our TI 84 calculator. So remember, you always want to make sure that your calculator is in degree mode. So you click the mode button, click degree, and then second mode gets you out of that screen. Now, you're wanting to hit second sine to get that, so second and then sine to get that, the sine of that -1. Okay, and then what was the fraction? We're going to do 15, 15 divided by 24. And then you hit enter. Okay, and we're going to get 38.68. Remember, that 8 is going to tell the 6 to round up. So our answer is actually going to be 38.7. So let's go back to our answer. So it's going to be 38.7 degrees because we're trying to find an angle. Okay, So that's the difference between trying to find an angle and a side. When you're trying to find an angle, you use the inverse button. When you're just trying to find a missing side, you don't. You just use the regular function. Okay? So let's do another example. So again, we circle our angle. Okay, across from the angle, or the 90 degrees is the hypotenuse. 8 is touching the angle, so that's going to be the adjacent, and then the side that's not touching is the opposite. Okay, again, we're not using the opposite because there's nothing in the opposite. So if we write our SOHCAHTOA, we're not using sine because sine has opposite. We're not using TOA or tangent because tangent has opposite. So we're going to be using cosine. So we're going to set this up as cosine of the angle is going to be equal to, now cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So it's going to be 8 over 11. Okay. So remember, to get rid of this cosine, we use the inverse function. So this is going to be x is equal to cosine of -1, that's our inverse, is 8 over 11. Okay, so this right here, that cosine inverse 8 over 11, that's what we're going to put in our calculator. And I'm going to use the Scientific Desmos calculator. I actually downloaded the app. There's an app for it. So there's a graphing Desmos, and then there's a calculator Desmos, okay? So in this case, again, we still want to make sure that we're leaving this with the degree, okay? Don't change it to radian. But if you look here, these are all the regular functions. So we want to go ahead and click on function, okay? That's where I clicked right there, function. And that's where you'll see your inverse functions right there, okay? So we're going to click the inverse of cosine, and then we got to go back to the main to get our numbers, and then 8 divided by 11. We hit enter, and there's our answer, okay? So it's going to be 43.34. That 4 is going to tell the 3 to stay. So we go back to our page, and our answer is going to be x is equal to 43.3 degrees. Okay, and that's basically it. All right, I'll do 2 more examples just so we can kind of get the hang of it. I'll go through these a little bit quicker, and then that's how you find missing angles. So again, we have SOHCAHTOA. So we circle. The one across from the right angle is hypotenuse. This right here is the adjacent, and then 20 is the opposite. So we're not using the hypotenuse, so we're not using sine, we're not using cosine, we're going to be using tangent for this function. So we hit tangent of the angle x is equal to, tangent is opposite over adjacent. So opposite is 20 over adjacent, which is 37. Okay, again, we're using that inverse function. So tangent of -1 is 20 over 37. Go to our calculator. So tangent -1 of 20 divided by 37. And we get our answer over here, which is 28.39. That 9 is going to tell the 3 to round up. Okay, rounding is super, super important in this. Okay, because if you round wrong, you're going to input the answer wrong. It's not going to count it correct. So you want to make sure that you are rounding correctly. Okay, so our answer there would be 28.4. Okay, so let's do this final one. All right, so we have x, and then 23 is my hypotenuse, 18 is the adjacent, and the opposite is nothing. So again, we're not using the opposite, so we're not using we're not using TOA, we're going to be using cosine. So we have cosine of the angle is equal to adjacent over hypotenuse. So 18 over 23. We use the inverse cosine. 18 divided by 23. Okay. Go to our calculator. Again, go to the function key. And you do, what was it? It was 18 divided by 23. Hit enter, and we get 38.49. Again, that 9 is going to tell the 4 to round up because it's bigger than 5. So our final answer is going to be 38.5 degrees.